He thought it was just another quiet evening, a family dinner, laughter echoing through the home, and a sense of safety most of us take for granted. But safety can vanish in seconds, especially when the color of your skin turns ordinary moments into dangerous ones. It began with a knock at the door, not the kind that brings neighbors with kindness, but the kind that brings trouble disguised as authority. A group of men claimed they had the right to be there. They wore the confidence of power, but none of the badges to prove it. And in the blink of an eye, words turned to violence. His wife was struck, humiliated in her own home. But what they didn't know was who her husband truly was, and what he was capable of. So what happens when hate knocks on the wrong door? Marcus Johnson wasn't just a veteran. He was a husband, a father, and a man who believed in building a safe, steady life for his family. After years of serving overseas as a Navy SEAL, he traded battlefields for backyard barbecues and long deployments for evenings at home with his wife, Erica. To anyone who knew them, they were the picture of resilience, two people who had weathered storms together and finally found peace in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Life in that community wasn't perfect, but it was predictable. Marcus had worked hard for that sense of normalcy, mowing the lawn on Saturdays, grilling with neighbors, and walking hand in hand with Erica under streetlights. For him, peace wasn't just a luxury, it was hard-earned. But beneath the surface, there were cracks, whispers in the neighborhood that they didn't belong, unwelcoming stares from certain residents who couldn't see past Marcus's skin. Erica brushed it off at first, calling it ignorance, nothing more. Marcus, however, had felt enough hostility in his life to recognize when danger was lurking, even if it hid behind fake smiles and forced politeness. Still, he chose hope. He chose to believe their family could thrive here, that discipline, love, and patience could drown out prejudice. And for a while, it worked. Days blurred into weeks of routine and comfort, the kind of life Marcus had dreamed about while sleeping on cold ground in distant countries. But peace is fragile, and when hate feels threatened, it doesn't knock politely, it barges in. Marcus didn't know it yet, but his family's quiet evening was about to be shattered by men who thought power came from intimidation, men who mistook his silence for weakness. And when they finally crossed the line, they weren't just picking a fight. They were waking a warrior. The evening had started like any other. Dinner dishes clinked softly in the sink as Erica wiped the counter, humming to herself. Marcus sat on the porch, letting the cool night air settle over him, a glass of water in hand, his mind calm. For a brief moment, everything felt right. Then, headlights cut across the driveway. A black SUV rolled up slowly, too slowly, like a predator circling its prey. 4 men stepped out. They weren't police, though they dressed the part, matching jackets with patches stitched on, radios clipped to their shoulders, and steel-toed boots stomping against the pavement. They carried themselves with the swagger of authority, but none of the legitimacy. Fake HOA enforcers, pretending to protect the neighborhood. Marcus tensed. He'd seen this before, not in suburban streets, but in war zones where men hid behind uniforms to justify cruelty. Erica came to the doorway, confused. "What do they want?" she whispered. The men didn't ask permission. They marched up the driveway, voices raised, accusing Marcus of breaking community rules, parking in the wrong spot, making too much noise, existing too loudly. It was all nonsense, but Marcus had lived long enough to know these weren't really about rules. This was about reminding him he didn't belong. He stood, calm but firm. "Evening, is there a problem?" His voice was steady, the kind of voice trained to hold ground. But the leader sneered, stepping closer, crowding his space. "The problem is, people like you think you can just move in and do whatever you want." The words stung, not because they were new, but because they were so familiar. Erica stepped forward, protective, her hand brushing Marcus's arm. "Please leave. You have no right to be here." That's when it happened. The man's hand lashed out, striking Erica across the face. The sound cracked through the night like a gunshot. For a split second, silence swallowed the air. Marcus frozen, Erica stumbling back in shock, her cheek burning red. Everything slowed. Marcus's heart pounded, his vision tunneling. Rage, hot and sharp, surged through his body. But he didn't move. Not yet. Because Marcus knew a truth most men didn't. Retaliation was power. But timing was survival. The men laughed, mistaking his stillness for fear. They shoved past him, barking threats, warning him to watch himself if he wanted to stay in the neighborhood. One kicked over a flower pot, another spat on the ground, their cruelty deliberate, meant to humiliate. Erica's eyes filled with tears, not just from the sting on her face, but from the humiliation of being violated in her own home. Marcus clenched his fists behind his back. Every muscle screamed for release, but years of discipline had taught him patience. He let them walk away, for now, because something darker than rage burnt inside him, the cold calculation of a man trained to fight battles most couldn't imagine. The SUV door slammed. Tires squealed. The men drove off laughing, their taunts echoing in the night. To them, this was over. A display of dominance, another black family put in their place. But they had no idea who Marcus truly was. They had no idea the man they had. Just Provoked had survived ambushes, firefights, and enemies far deadlier than them. They had no idea they had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Inside, Erica trembled, her hand pressed against her cheek. "Marcus, what are we going to do?" Her voice cracked, heavy with fear. He didn't answer, not yet. He just stared into the darkness where their SUV had disappeared, jaw tight, breath slow. He knew what was coming. He knew they would be back, louder, bolder, and convinced they were untouchable. And when they returned, Marcus would be ready, because this time he wouldn't be waiting on the porch. 2 nights passed. The neighborhood seemed still, almost too still, like the air before, a storm. Marcus barely slept. Every creak of the house kept him alert. Every car that slowed near his driveway made his muscles coil. He knew men like that didn't disappear. They escalated, and he was right. Just after midnight, the rumble of an engine broke the silence. Headlights swept across the windows, brighter this time, bolder. The same black SUV stopped at the curb and outspilt the same men. Except tonight, they weren't hiding their malice. Baseball bats in hand, beer bottles clinked as they laughed. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was about sending a message. Erica gasped when she saw them through the curtains. Marcus. Her voice was sharp with fear. He put a hand on her shoulder, steady but unyielding. "Stay inside, no matter what." The men stormed onto the lawn, kicking over chairs, smashing flower pots, and hurling slurs that sliced through the night like knives. Their leader banged on the front door, the wood shaking under his fists. "Come out, boy! Let's see if you're as tough as you think." Marcus stepped outside, calm, controlled, but inside, his blood was fire. The men circled him like vultures, smirking, feeding off each other's hatred. One swung his bat, cracking it against the mailbox, sparks flying. Another spit inches from Marcus's boots. They thought he would break. They thought fear would shrink him down. But Marcus didn't. "Move." He locked eyes with the leader, unflinching, his silence louder than their threats. And that's when the first blow landed. A bat slammed into his side, the sound hollow and brutal. Pain exploded through his ribs, but he didn't fall. Another swung. Marcus caught it mid-air, twisting, ripping the weapon from the man's hands, with a precision that came from years of training. In seconds, the discipline he had held back snapped free. He moved like a storm unleashed, disarming, countering, every strike controlled but devastating. One man lunged. Marcus dropped him with a single bone-shattering move. Another charged. Marcus turned his momentum against him, sending him sprawling onto the pavement. Erica's scream pierced the chaos as she watched from the doorway, but Marcus was unshakable. He wasn't just defending himself, he was defending every moment of peace these men tried to destroy. The leader staggered back, shock painted across his face. He had come expecting an easy victory, a terrified family too afraid to fight back. Instead, he was staring at a man who had fought real wars, a man who carried the weight of survival etched into every scar. But hatred is stubborn. With a roar, the leader swung his bat again, wild, desperate. Marcus sidestepped, grabbed him by the collar, and slammed him against the SUV so hard the metal groaned. The man's eyes widened with fear for the first time. Marcus leaned close, his voice low and controlled but seething with a fury deeper than rage. "You will never put your hands on my wife again." The other men scrambled, dragging their groaning friends into the SUV. Their laughter was gone, replaced by silence and panic. Tires squealed as they sped off into the night, leaving only wreckage and fear in their wake. Marcus stood in the driveway, chest heaving, ribs throbbing but unbroken. Erica rushed to his side, tears streaming, her arms wrapping around him. For a long moment, the world felt suspended. Shattered glass glinting in the moonlight, the echoes of violence still hanging in the air. They had tried to intimidate him, to humiliate him, to make him feel small, but tonight they had awakened something far greater. And as Marcus stared into the distance where the SUV disappeared, one truth burnt through the pain and the chaos. This fight was no longer just his family's. It was a battle against every shadow of hate that dared to knock on his door. The night grew quiet again, but peace was an illusion. Shattered glass littered the driveway, flower pots were crushed, and the porch was scarred by violence. Erica held Marcus close, her tears soaking his shirt. She was safe, this time, but the weight of what had just happened pressed on both of them. Marcus's ribs ached with every breath, but the pain didn't compare to the fire in his chest. He had fought battles all over the world, but nothing burnt like this, knowing that the war had followed him home. A war he hadn't chosen, but one that found him simply because of the color of his skin. By morning, the neighbors were whispering. Some pretended not to see. Others stared from behind curtains, their silence as loud as the slurs from the night before. A few offered quiet words of concern, but none had stepped outside when it mattered. And Marcus knew that silence was part of the problem. The SUV never returned that week, not after the beating they took. But the scars remained. Erica still jumped at sudden knocks. Marcus found himself scanning every car that passed too slowly. Peace had been shattered, and trust in his own community was gone. Still, Marcus refused to be broken. Instead of shrinking back, he began to speak out. He reported the incident. He told their story to those who would listen, not because he needed pity, but because he knew silence only fed hate. And while some dismissed it as an isolated event, others nodded with recognition because they too had lived through nights just like his. And that's the painful truth. Marcus's story isn't rare. It's not just about one man, one wife, one neighborhood. It's about a cycle. Families terrorized in their own homes. People judged not by their character but by their skin. It's about communities where hate wears disguises, whether in fake uniforms or real ones, and how quickly violence is justified when the victim looks like Marcus. What happened that night was more than an attack on one family. It was a reminder of how fragile safety is for so many. Marcus had the training, the strength, and the discipline to fight back. But what about those who don't? What about the countless names we never hear, the families who never see justice, and the stories that never make it beyond a headline, if they're even told at all? Erica would later say the hardest part wasn't the slap. It was the humiliation, the way those men laughed as if her pain meant nothing. And Marcus would say the hardest part wasn't the bruises. It was knowing that no matter how many battles he had fought for his country, he was still seen as an outsider in his own neighborhood. That is the weight of racism. It doesn't just strike once and leave. It lingers. It poisons. It tells you that no matter how much you give, how much you serve, or how much you sacrifice, you will still be seen as less. But Marcus's story also carries something else. It carries resistance. It carries the reminder that silence cannot be the answer. He fought back, not just with his fists that night, but with his voice in the days after. He refused to be erased, refused to let fear control his family's life. And so we're left with a question, one bigger than Marcus, bigger than one neighborhood. How many more families have to suffer before the silence breaks? How many more front porches, quiet walks, and ordinary nights must turn into battlegrounds before people finally see that this isn't just someone else's problem? Because the truth is, racism doesn't just live in the shadows. It lives in the silence. And the silence is what keeps it alive. Marcus stood in the wreckage of his porch, his wife by his side, battered but unbroken. And though hate had knocked on his door, it didn't win. The question now is, when hate knocks again, what will we do? Will we look away? Or will we finally answer with courage? The choice, as always, is ours.